Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar on routes to market. My name is Richard Hayward, and I'm a market advisor for Enterprise Ireland based in our London office. And I'm part of the new exporters team, where our role is to support Irish companies who have the ambition to go international, but perhaps don't know where to start or how to go about it. So today I'm joined by Ruth Robinson from Full Circle, who will be leading today's webinar. Ruth's not only supported hundreds of SMEs in identifying and capitalising on new business opportunities in international markets, but she's also got first-hand of experience of launching her own business and has a deep appreciation of what's required to execute a successful export journey. So like I said, the focus of today's webinar will be on routes to market. So, it's a really important topic, and choosing the right route to market is one of the most strategic, decisions a company can take at the start of their journey. It shapes how efficiently you reach customers, how quickly you can grow, and how effectively you can compete internationally. So a well-designed route to market can really be the difference between simply entering a new region and actually truly gaining traction within it. So today's session is really all about understanding those pathways. So whether it's direct to your customers or whether it's indirect through various partners, and really about learning how to match the right approach with your product, your resources, and your long-term ambitions. So before I hand over to Ruth, just a couple of housekeeping points. So the webinar will last for an hour in total today, with Ruth's presentation lasting around 45 to 50 minutes, followed by a 10 to 15-minute Q&A. If you've got any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A function at the top of the panel on your screen. And finally, the session is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be made available to you after the session today. So without further delay, happy to hand over to you, Ruth, who will take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody, and very pleased to be here to present to you today on choosing the right path for international growth through your route to market. So just in terms of the agenda and what I'm going to cover off today, we're going to talk firstly an introduction and some definitions of the various routes to market, so just that we're clear on what we're talking about. I'm going to give you some myths that are out there that you'll often hear around routes to market, and then what the reality is, in fact, instead of those myths. And then we're going to go into a bit more detail on how you choose the right route to market. So both looking from a market research perspective and also looking internally at what it is that you actually want when you're doing your exports, and therefore using that to kind of decide what is the right route to market. And we'll talk a little bit about the trade-offs that you need to make as well. And then tips for managing indirect routes to market. So if you're not doing it, going direct, you're not selling directly through your website, you've got some management to do of third parties, some tips in terms of managing those routes to market. I will say, just in terms of my slides today, this is a slightly heavier topic maybe than some of the other ones. And there's, some of the slides are quite text heavy, but there's a fair bit of kind of chunky information to cover. So I've had to kind of do them that way. So please bear with me when I get through the slides, but hopefully those slides are then useful for you to refer back to as you're making these kinds of decisions for your business. Okay, so first of all, what do we actually mean by route to market? And quite simply, this is just the method that you use to get your products or services into the hands of your customers. So direct routes then will include, selling directly yourself, or using an e-commerce channel via your own website. And then indirect routes, here we're talking about distributors, agents, marketplaces, resellers, partners, wholesale, retail, etc. So we'll be going into the detail of each of those. And the key point, just to begin with, is that figuring out what works best for your product or service will require careful thought and research, and it has huge implications for your export performance. So this isn't something that should just be decided upon lightly or at a whim. You really do need to have a think about it, and it will have implications for how your business will be successful in terms of export. So the direct routes then, again, this is just a little bit more kind of on the definitions and what we're talking about with each of these different routes. So indirect sales, this is where either you or your team will sell your products or services directly to your target customer in the target export market. So kind of fairly self-explanatory, I suppose. But say, for example, you have a software product for the engineering sector. You might decide that you or your team will just approach companies. Say you want to go to the Netherlands, you might decide that you or your team will approach those companies directly in the Netherlands in that sector and try to get them to directly buy from you, and then have that relationship directly with them. Online direct then is where you sell your products via your own website, and then you're going to ship to your target customers. So say, for example, you have a clothing company, you will enable the shipping for target export markets. And we've all done that as consumers, where we're buying, directly from a brand that we like, and just getting shipped to directly. So that's what we mean then by online direct. The indirect routes then, there are more than this, but these are the kind of principal indirect routes. So the first one is marketplaces. So this is where you would list or display your products on a third-party platform. They're typically online, and certainly in the last few years, the popularity and the number of marketplaces has massively grown. But basically, you're displaying or listing your product on one of these third-party platforms, and your customers are then buying through this platform. And on the platforms, there are multiple sellers and a broad audience typically. So examples of those marketplaces would be Amazon is the biggest and best known, but also Etsy, TikTok Shop, eBay, Instagram Shop, and then there's also kind of sector specific ones that have arisen as well, or niche ones for certain products. And the App Store would be another kind of a marketplace. If you say if you have an app, so you might decide you have a consumer goods product, you might sell that on Amazon, or if you have an app, you might sell that via the App Store. Then retail wholesale, this is where you sell your product into a retailer. So they add their margin and they sell it on to their customers. So an example of this would be, say you have a baby product and you want to sell it. You will sell it into a baby shop or a chain or a baby store in whatever your target export market is. And then they will sell that on to your target customer, who presumably is parents. Distributors then, this is where you provide your product to a distributor who will sell it on to the retailer or on to an end customer. So depending on the kind of product you have and depending on how that end customer is reached, they will take it from you and sell it on the retailer, or they'll take it from you and get it on to the end customer who could be, for example, a B2B customer. There's a couple of different ways that the distributor might operate. So they may buy a certain amount of stock from you, hold it in their warehouse, and then sell it on. That's the kind of most typical route. Or the other way is they may sell what's called on consignment, where they'll hold stock for you, but you actually still own it. And they will only pay you whenever they have sold it on. So sometimes if you're working with a new distributor, they'll be reluctant to buy a whole load of stuff from you at the start, but they might be prepared to hold stock and sell it on, but they'll only pay then once it's been sold. So example of that then would be, say you had a tan product, you might appoint a distributor to sell your product to local pharmacies in the target market. That's obviously going to give you some scale because they're going to be able to hold that and get it out easily. And you don't have to manage all the logistics. Resellers or partners then, this is where you will partner with a company in the target market who will typically add something to your product or service before selling on to the end customer, or they will integrate your offering with theirs and then sell on to the customer. So I suppose the difference with a reseller or a partner and a distributor is A, the level of involvement with you, so that it is much more of that closer partner type relationship. but also rather than just getting your product and immediately selling it on, they're doing something else. So it happens a huge amount with IT. So say you have a software product, you partner with an IT consultancy, they will install your product, configure and provide support for that for customers in that target country. So this is where there's quite a lot of support needed by that customer. And you therefore really need somebody in market who you can partner with. Or it may be that they're just going to integrate your offering with theirs, and there's like a white label element to this. So that could be the case too in a kind of a reseller or a partner relationship. So it is quite distinct from the distributor. The sales agent then is where you appoint a sales agent who's an independent operator. Quite often they are working alone, and they're quite often just like a self-employed person. They can also be a company. But you will appoint a sales agent who will identify customers for your product or service in the target market. And then they will either do an introduction for you. So they might, to introduce you to a specific company who they think has a need for your product. You may then go over and do the presentation and complete the sale, or they may do the whole sale for you, and then they will get paid a commission. So an example of this would be, say you have a specialist piece of testing equipment for factories. You might appoint a technical sales agent who's well networked in that industry and location, and they're really there to kind of identify customers for you, and to either make those introductions or do the sales. And an interesting kind of recent thing, the world of online influencers, they're a kind of a sales agent as well, because they're independent. They will get paid, commission or referral fees for customers that they bring to you. But it's kind of an interesting and modern type of sales agent, really. Okay, so some myths and realities then around these routes to market. And the first one that we hear a lot of the time is that people appoint a distributor and they think, brilliant, I'm done. I've got my distributor. They're going to sell for me and it's great. I've conquered that market. But the reality is very different. And unfortunately, a distributor will have a portfolio of products, and they're interested in the growth and success of that portfolio. So much more so than the success of you, they're interested in the success of them. And they want to have products that sell. So without, you're one of many products that they're selling. And if without support from you, you will get low support from them. You will get low sales really from them. So you need to kind of think about how you're going to encourage them to promote your products, what support you can provide to them to enable them to do that. And we'll talk a little bit more when we come on to the section on distributors. But the key point here is it's not a kind of once they're appointed, that's it, guaranteed success. The reality is very different. Another myth, and you'll see when we have the tables, when I'm comparing the various routes to market, which is in a slide to follow, you'll see that direct sales appears often to be cheaper, because you will sacrifice less margin. But the key thing to think about here is you will sacrifice less margin when you sell direct, but there are many costs for your business. So that can include hiring, training and managing your sales staff. It'll include expenses and costs involved in selling, those if you're flying to and from or you're traveling to customers, subsistence when they're away, etc., as well as the time cost to your business. So finding export sales is always more complex. It is always more time consuming than in your home market. So there is that huge time cost where if you have somebody selling direct, they aren't focused on the domestic market or other things going on in your business. So there is a big cost there. And in addition, you will typically expand more slowly when selling direct. Another myth then is that marketplaces guarantee instant global sales. And we see this all the time. A business that appears to go viral and suddenly their products are flying out the door on TikTok Shop. Or you might hear of, the odd product that, launches on Amazon or launches on TikTok and suddenly it seems to be massively popular. But those are really the exceptions. And whilst those marketplaces do technically give you access to millions of potential customers, they don't automatically provide customers who want your product. So there are millions of listings on the platforms, and the algorithms that they use decide what gets shown to whom. So you will still need to create awareness, interest, and trust if you're to be successful on those platforms. And as we'll discuss in the section on it, there are costs and substantial margin sacrifices involved as well. So the hard truth, unfortunately, when it comes to route to market is that there is no easy option. Your choice of route to market must align with actual buyer behaviour in your target market. And there are trade-offs which you're going to have to consider with margin, control, speed and capability in each option. So that's really what we're going to talk about in this next section, which is how to choose the right route to market. So we're going to think about both the market research that you need to do to inform your route to market, and then looking at each of the different routes to market in turn and giving you a sense of the comparisons between them. Okay, so firstly, in terms of market research to inform your route to market, there's kind of three big questions that you're really trying to answer when it comes to researching the market. And the first is you really want to know, how does my target customer in that market typically buy? Okay, so in the example on the right then, say you have a piece of medical device or a piece of medical equipment, and your target customer is a hospital. So you want to think about, okay, well, how does the target customer in that market typically buy? So how do hospitals buy? And the reality for that is for smaller pieces of equipment, they will typically have various distributors, various medical device distributors. So hospitals for smaller pieces of equipment generally aren't buying direct. They're buying through a distributor, through another company. For larger pieces of equipment then, or very large sales, they're procuring these through a tendering process. So that's really important to know in terms of how you would sell into that type of a customer. What buying processes then do they trust? That's the next question that you're going to ask. And in this example, if you're thinking about that example, they're going to trust. There's a huge emphasis on trust and safety, obviously, in the hospital environment. So they'll only buy through tested methods. So they'll want to use an established and known distributor, or they'll want to do a comprehensive tendering process. So that's a key question for you to ask of your customers in that market. What buying processes do they trust? And what level of support do these customers need? So in this example, if you were selling large equipment, it's going to need comprehensive support, servicing and maintenance, i.e. a lot of support. But you might have a product that your customer just buys and they don't need any support. So if it's clothing, if it's a consumer product, quite often they don't really need a lot of support. They just need the product. And the key point then is that your route to market should match the buyer behavior in that market. So, thinking about it, a technical product that needs support will make much more sense to have a kind of a local partner base there. So that might be quite difficult for you when it comes to selling direct. And in some countries as well, there may be more of an expectation that there will be a local partner, or they'll be much more used to dealing locally. So we would find, for example, markets like the Netherlands and Belgium, they're much more culturally open to dealing directly with suppliers from other countries. That's kind of culturally accepted certainly in the business to business world. Whereas you might find in other countries, for example, in Spain and to a high extent also in France, that companies will prefer to work with local companies, and so you may be better having a kind of a local partner. So there's kind of specifics around this market research, and there's also kind of general attitudes and cultural kind of norms. So it's definitely something to spend some time considering. And if you're not sure how to do that research, check out the previous webinars. So there's a webinar on researching markets, competitors, and understanding buyer behaviour. And there's another one on crafting a compelling pitch for your target international buyer. Both of those will be useful in terms of this, learning more about how to do this type of market research. And then the next part really is thinking as well from your own perspective. What is it that you want? What is it that's suitable for your product? And if you look at the comparison table, the key point here is that there's trade-offs within each option. So if you want a high degree of control and margin, then you're likely to expand more slowly, and you're probably going to have to take on more of the complexity of this yourself. If you're looking for a faster option, a fast and less complex option, that will typically involve reduced control and margin. We will go through each of these in turn as well, but to give you a sense of the table, we often, this is a key question to ask. Who are you selling to? Who's selling to the end customer? So in the direct sales, you're selling to the end customer, and that's kind of fairly straightforward. Therefore, it can be a bit slower because you've got to identify those customers, but you will have that high level of control. You will maintain your profit margin, but you're going to have to deal with all the complexity. If you're selling online direct, you're selling again directly to that end customer. Kind of medium speed, because customers can also find you more easily. It's not always reliant on you doing outbound. You will have a fairly high degree of control, albeit there's shipping and stuff involved. You will maintain a pretty, medium to high margin. Again, some shipping costs, etc. And the complexity is kind of medium. And then on the indirect routes, the marketplace route, you sell to the end customer via the platform. You have to get that product to the end customer, but you're getting that speed because you have the listings. You will have, however, a much lower level of control. You will sacrifice margin, so the margin that's left will be low to medium, but there's also a kind of a lower degree of complexity in that route. Retail wholesale, then you sell to the retail store and the retailer sends to the end customer. Speed is medium, control is medium, margin is medium, and complexity is medium. So it's kind of a middle of the road option. You're sacrificing margin because the retailer obviously needs a margin, but they're managing some of the complexity. You have some control over the product, but the retailer obviously maintains some of that as well. Then with the distributor, you're definitely talking about a faster speed because they will be identifying those customers. They should have those customers. They will be selling, the distributor will be selling on to the end customer, or a retailer or reseller will be. But you will have low control, you'll have a lower margin and a medium level of complexity. A reseller will be selling to the end customer on your behalf. You've got a kind of medium level of speed, low to medium control, medium margin, and high complexity because you've got a lot of things to work out with that reseller. And your sales agent, then you will typically sell to the end customer via the agent. So you're still selling to the customer. They are actually doing the sale on your behalf. So you will be getting that product to the end customer, but the agent is the kind of middle person there. And you've got medium speed, control, margin, and complexity. Okay, and so this bit, as I say, is slightly on the heavy side, but it is important to kind of look at these trade-offs. So we're going to talk about each option and give you a bit more of the detail, looking at these 4 key elements. So if you're selling direct, what are the kind of typical costs and margins? So costs are things like the salaries, the commissions. Maybe you're paying for a CRM tool. Maybe you're using HubSpot or Pipedrive or whatever you're using. You'll have travel costs and marketing costs as well, but you will maintain your whole gross margin. In terms of the control, that is maintained by you. So if you think that's very important, that you have control over your selling process, this may be the way to go. You will have control over the selling approach, the messaging, the pricing, all of that is within your control. but the speed will be much slower because you've got to find each sale and then it has to be converted by you or your team. And a key element as well here that I haven't really mentioned so much about so far, but is really important to consider, is the customer relationship. So within this model, you hold that customer relationship. You've got the customer data. It's your responsibility to provide support and aftercare. So that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. It depends on the situation, but you are responsible for the customer relationship, obviously, in direct sales. And in terms of the internal capabilities that you need, because this again is going to help you to decide which option is for you. So what internal capabilities you need in this option will be your export selling skills, management of a sales team if you're going direct, account management skills, and potentially language skills. So if you spot great opportunity for your product in Germany and you want to sell direct, you're going to have some language skills in German in order to make this work. However, if the target market is the UK, if it's America, then those language skills obviously won't be as important. Accents and colloquialisms aside. Online direct, then typical costs will be the website fees. For example, if you're using like Shopify platform or something, you need e-commerce, so there'll be fees associated with that. Potentially web development, shipping costs, packaging, returns, and refunds. Can all be costs involved. But again, you will maintain your whole gross margin. And you have the control in the same way as a direct. You're controlling the messaging on the site, the pricing. The speed will be slower because your website needs to be found and then to convert to sales. And again, in the customer relationship, you've got the data. It's your responsibility to provide the support. The internal capability then is quite different from the direct sales because you will need to either internally or through outsourcing, you will need to have digital marketing capability. You need to have good, if you're going to be successful, you're going to need to have good SEO targeted in your target export market. You're going to need web development skills, internally or outsourced. You're going to need to think about conversion optimization as well as the logistics around, for example, pick and pack. So the internal capabilities for online direct is quite different to the direct sales. In the marketplaces, then typical costs will include shipping, advertising, and also the hidden costs of refunds. Margins, this is the margin that the marketplace will need. They can vary so much. So it could be anything from kind of 6% up to 45% in fees plus additional fees. So there's a huge variation depending on the marketplace option that you're taking. And for example, if it's fulfilled by Amazon, etc. The other thing is the additional fees is something to really be very careful about within this option. So, for example, that can be transaction fees, that can be advertising fees, that can be, you might have, in order to get these kind of sales, you might need commissions for influencers. You may have discount codes. All of these things can play a role. So what seems like a good margin can be deteriorated very, very quickly through this method. So it's really worth looking at all of those fees to understand what you're dealing with before you use marketplaces. Control and speed, then you've got much less control. Due to the marketplace's algorithms and its policies. So you really are giving up a lot of control through these options, albeit your listing may well be yours, but everything else is kind of controlled by them. You can get faster speed and sometimes very rapid virality, but again, that's not that common. But it will be faster. A key point is the customer data will be held by the marketplace. So that will give you very limited options for follow-up or ongoing relationship. And that's one of the things we hear from clients all the time is their frustration around not knowing much about their customers because that data is held by the marketplace. And there's a role here in refunds that I'll talk about when it comes to the next slide. Internal capability needed here, digital marketing skills, branding, conversion optimization, either internally or outsourced. Those skills are absolutely essential if you're going to be successful when it comes to the marketplaces. Retail wholesale then, typical costs will involve advertising, logistics, sometimes promotional pricing that your retailer will expect you to do. You may have rebates involved with that retailer as well. They can all add to the costs. The margins will vary a lot depending on the sector. So, for example, what we typically would have found if you're selling into kind of pharmacy retail, I know this doesn't have food retailers on it, but this program doesn't have food companies on it, sorry. But those margins, would be kind of somewhere like 30-35%. Whereas you'll find in gift retail, they're looking for 50, 55, even up to 60% margin. So it really does depend on the sector, and it's something to again do your research on what those retailers will expect. Control, then you've got less control than direct because your retailer will control the location of the product in their shop. They'll control how much shelf space you get. They may control some of the merchandising and pricing, etc. So there is significantly less control when you're in the retail environment. And the speed is faster than direct because they're helping, it's in stores, people can see it, and it will vary depending on the type of store. The retailer then has the relationship with the customer and gathers the data, so you don't have that tight kind of customer relationship. You can obviously go in and do tastings, or you can try to get to know those customers, directly on your own social media, etc., where they're shopping. But ultimately, the retailer has that relationship with the customer, as opposed to you. Internal capability needed then, things like logistics, branding, product support, and activation are all important here. So I just want to give you an example of some of these. This is a real example from a client of mine. It was an Irish makeup brand, and they began selling on TikTok Shop, including in the UK market. They had rapid growth through really good brand building because they had brilliant digital marketing skills, very, very comfortable live on camera. She described TikTok to me as kind of QVC for Gen Zs. I thought it was quite a good description. But they're able to kind of do the product demos as a key element. So very, very successful on TikTok and using TikTok Shop to sell. However, TikTok increased their rates, which affected the margin for this company. TikTok also have an automatic refund policy. So if somebody has an issue with a product, or they claim to have an issue with the product, they will automatically process refunds, and you don't know until that's just happened. So that affected the profitability and also increased the volatility of their sales because they didn't know when they made a sale whether there would then be a follow-up of a refund. Shipping costs increased. They had no data on their customers in order to target them for ongoing sales, and they were having to use discounts and affiliates, which is affecting profitability. So that company has adapted their route to market strategy, where they're now relying more on their direct website sales and increasing use of ongoing CRM, especially email marketing. They've introduced more retail stockists, and they're still using UK influencers, but they're directing their followers to their website rather than the TikTok shop. So they've adapted their strategy based on what their experience was. They will now grow more slowly, but they're going to retain more control and have less volatility in their export sales. So just an example, it can work really well for certain people in marketplaces. These are some of the things to be aware of and just what happens in a real situation. Okay, so analysis then of the distribution route. So typical costs with distribution is sampling and possibly refunds. The margins expected will be 20 to 40% of margin depending on the industry, sometimes a bit lower, rarely higher than that. But again, huge variation. The control, you will have a limited a level of control because you'll be limited in terms of influencing how and where your product gets sold. So you'll be able to have some conversations with your distributor around that, but you are obviously giving up elements of control. It's typically faster than selling direct, not necessarily as fast as selling to marketplaces or into retail. The distributor then has the relationship with the retailer or with the customer, and they will in turn have the relationship with the end customers. So again, you're giving up a lot of that sort of customer relationship because you're potentially 2 steps removed, because you're selling to the distributor, they can be selling to the retailer, and the retailer can be selling to the end customer. So you really don't have that relationship. Internal capability needed then, product training, marketing collateral, other product support or activation. Resellers then, costs here are setup costs. Margins can vary, but resellers typically expect somewhere between 15 and 40% of a margin, depending on the industry and depending on the complexity of that industry or the complexity of that product. You will have less control in selling direct because the reseller is effectively doing the selling, but with your input. So hopefully that reseller partner thing, you will have some much more influence, but again, it is ultimately them who are selling to the customer. It's faster speed than direct. Again, it will vary depending on the reseller's network and their level of success. The reseller primarily holds a relationship with the customer, but there can be some joint activity, and you may actually provide the customer support in this situation. So there may be a way through a reseller or partner relationship for you to have some more of that customer relationship. Internal capability needed includes product training, product support, marketing, sometimes relationship management skills, definitely, and partner working. So again, it's just some other things to consider there. And then the sales agent costs will be sampling, setup costs, quite minimal actually in terms of upfront costs with this route to market. And in terms of margins, agents will expect a commission on their sales or on annual values. And commission rates vary hugely depending on the product price, depending on the margins, depending on the sector. So I've said there could be less than 1%. It could be in excess of 30. There's not really a guide that's going to be that helpful for you because there's so much variation, and it really does depend on those things that I've mentioned there. If you're selling through a sales agent, you will have less control in selling direct, but often more than selling through a distributor because you're quite likely to have some involvement in that sales process. It can be faster than direct, but slower than some of the other indirect routes, and there's lots of variation. The customer relationship is generally shared, so this will enable you to have more access to customers than the indirect channels, especially if your sales agent is there to do the introductions and you're doing the sale. But even if they're doing the sale, then typically you will hand over or they'll hand back to you if there's support required, etc. So you will have more of a customer relationship through this option. Internal capability then is around product training for that agent, maybe marketing collateral, selling and presentation skills may be required if the agent is only doing the introducing. An example then, just on some of these indirect routes, an Irish software company, they began selling directly into the UK market where they had full control of the product or margin. But they found that their growth was really slow because customers had no knowledge of the company and the product was quite technical. They then employed a salesperson, but that person made very limited headway in the market. So they had a new route to market strategy, which was to partner with a complementary provider who became what's known as a VAR. You might hear that term, which just means value added reseller. And the reseller packaged up the software product with their own offering. So they effectively white labeled the Irish product to provide a comprehensive solution. So the company now has much more rapid export growth. But in order to do that, they've sacrificed margin and sacrificed some control in order to do so. So they support the reseller with product training and after sales support. Okay, that was quite a heavy section, but what we're really trying to get you to do is thinking about how you're going to select your own route to market. So to help you decide the route to market for your product or service, consider what's worked in Ireland for you and why. Can that be replicated in your target export market? But be careful because quite often it can't. Your export market will have a very different, be very different. What do you know about buyer behaviour in that target export market? How do they buy? What do they trust? What support do they need? What margin do you have to work with in the target export market? So can you sacrifice enough margin to make your product interesting and profitable for some of those indirect routes to market? A very key question. How much control of the selling process do you need or do you want? And ask yourself, does my product really need me to have a high level of control? So if you're a bit of a control freak or you've been used to having that control maybe in Ireland, just ask yourself, do I really need that, or is it just something that I want? Or maybe, maybe legitimately you do need that control. But definitely ask yourself the question. What speed do you want, or do you need your product or service? At what speed, sorry, do you want or need your product or service to gain traction in the target market? So maybe there's something sensitive around, time sensitive around your market entry. So for example, if you know there's a competitor poised to enter that market, you may want to get rapid traction, and therefore you need to sacrifice more control, sacrifice more margin, etc. Maybe you've got an investment round coming and you need to show sales in that market. Again, that might affect the speed, or maybe you can just take your time. What internal capabilities do you have? So what have you got in terms of selling skills, marketing skills, training skills, relationship management, etc.? Because the presence or absence of those skills will have an impact on the decision around route to market. And the key point is that the decision will always involve some kind of trade-off. Okay, so under our final section then, which is on managing indirect sales. So indirect routes to market, and by this we mean obviously our distributors, our resellers, our agents, our wholesale, etc. Those indirect routes to market only work if you can actively manage the sales channel. So you want to ensure that you recruit the right partners, you enable them to sell, you motivate them to prioritize your product or service, you resolve any conflicts, you protect your margins, and you create a win-win situation of mutual growth. So when it comes to selecting your distributor or selecting your partner, there are some sort of overarching issues at the start, which is, first of all, deciding which segments or geographic areas you're going to sell to directly versus selling indirect. Are you going to give that distributor or partner exclusivity, or are you going to have multiple distributors or partners? This is a really, really important question. So quite often a distributor will look for geographic exclusivity in an area. So say, for example, you appoint a distributor, they want exclusivity for Scotland. But if you give that distributor exclusivity, that means nobody else can sell for you in Scotland, quite often including you. You can't sell directly there. So there's a big risk in doing that. And you would only really grant that if you knew that this distributor was brilliant and could really do a good job for you. And you would need to put lots of caveats and clauses around that exclusivity. And you may make it time bound, for example. If you use multiple distributors, that's fine. But again, they may not have any loyalty to you. You've not shown any loyalty to them. So again, there's less of a close relationship there. So it's something to be considered. You might decide to use a national large-scale distributor or partner, or you may go for a smaller and niche operator. So depending on the product, depending on the complexity of that product, you might decide, look, I actually really need a niche operator who's very well networked in the particular sector that I'm targeting, and I need them to know a lot about my product. So I don't want them to be distributing, thousands of products. Or it might be, look, you've got a consumer product, it needs to get into those shops, and you just need that large scale distributor who has the scale, who has the geographic reach. How much selling do they need to do for you as well? Is this a case where you're going to be doing all of the marketing, and the end customer is going to know about your product, and you basically just need them to do the kind of logistics? Or do they actually need to do the selling for you? Do you need them to be really proactively selling your product? And then in selecting the right person, think about their sales capability, think about their technical competence, check their financial health, ask about their reputation and ask around about their reputation, and try to get a sense of their appetite for taking on new products. And also importantly, they kind of need to be pulling in the same direction as you. So if you realize at the start when you're talking to a distributor, they've got completely different ideas about how your product should be sold, it's likely that that will cause conflict for you and them. And then thinking about your value proposition for your indirect partners, you need to think about why if you're the indirect partner, they're going to be asking themselves, why should I sell your product instead of the 10 that I already have? And you've got to find some really compelling reasons why they should sell your product instead of the other ones that they have. And that's going to be to do, so if you look at the previous webinar, when we looked at value propositions, I had this image, this seesaw image. And effectively, what you're trying to do here is on the one side, you've got promise, differentiator, and evidence. So you've got to have a really compelling promise. You've got to have really strong differentiators, and you've got to have really good evidence as to why the end customer will want to buy your product. And that needs to be really easily digestible for a distributor. If they don't understand what it is that you sell, or they don't think customers are going to really want it, they just won't sell it for you. So you've got to have really strong reasons to buy on one side of the seesaw, and you've got to minimize on the other side of the seesaw. So the effort it takes to buy from you needs to be as low as possible. You need to make it super easy for the distributor to buy. And again, that comes down, the marketing collateral is there as well. It's easy for them to get the product for you. They know they can sell it on easily. The price needs to be right for the customer. And on the other side, there needs to be an attractive margin for them. And you need to do as much as you can to lower the risk for them in buying your product or service and selling on. So a value proposition for indirect partners looks like the same kind of thing as for the end customer, but you've got to also have that attractive margin. You've got to provide some good marketing support or additional support to that distributor, and you've got to lower the effort as much as possible for the distributor to buy from you as well. Sales enablement, then, if you're dealing with a distributor or partner, make it as easy as possible for them to sell your product and service. So that can be providing, for example, product training, providing sales tools, providing marketing collateral, technical support, whatever that might be. So really just thinking, what do they need in order to be able to successfully sell my product to that end customer? An example of this worked with an Irish software company. They were using a couple of UK value added resellers, and they had a whole kind of strategy around sales enablement. So they had excellent product training. So they did on-site initial training sessions for the sales staff of the VAR. They did follow-up quarterly online sessions, and they also provided target customer personas for that reseller. Sales tools wise, they had pitch decks, they had intro emails, they had demo videos, and they also had their MD go out to initial sales presentations to show how he would typically sell the product so that the sales staff in the VAR could learn from him. And the Irish company also agreed to pass on any UK leads directly to that VAR. So they were showing that they wanted to do business with them. They wanted to have that partnership. So rather than them going after those UK leads, they always passed any lead which was in the eligible territory, went directly to the VAR. They provided marketing collateral, like case studies, PDF flyers, and social post examples. And they also had the technical support through the help desk. And they had FAQs as well. So they provided a whole range of supports there to really enable those sales. And then when it comes to relationship management with your partner or with a distributor, you need to think win-win from the start. You both want sales and profit. So at the beginning, agree your targets, whether that's first quarter, half year, annual, and be super realistic about what those targets look like. There's no point in coming up with, a demanding massive sales in the first 6 months. It's going to take a while. The first quarter is going to be a settling in period. So do be super realistic in terms of what you're expecting and try to get them to agree with the targets as opposed to imposing them on your distributor or your partner. Agree all of the money elements. the margins, how those payments are to be made, how those payment schedules or how that payment schedule is to be done. Make that all really, really clear, because money is one of the biggest elements, as you can imagine, that you're going to fall out over. Agree territory, exclusivity or not, how your product is to be sold, how it isn't to be sold. Agree when you're going to meet, and have a regular and planned update meetings. So rather than kind of emergency meeting having to happen, if you have kind of regular, say, quarterly meetings in the diary, or maybe even online monthly meetings, whatever that is, have those agreed in advance, and agree the support that you'll provide and what you'll do, what they'll do, and when you'll do it, and how either of you will end the agreement if it's not working out. So agree what you can at the start, anticipate where the conflict may arise, and devise clear rules of engagement, especially around the money. And then in an ongoing way, there's two key aspects of this. So firstly, keeping them motivated to sell. You want to try to keep your product top of mind through regular contact with them, and thinking about how you keep them motivated with things like incentives, rewards, rebates, additional support, etc. So we had a company that actually used to have a fully paid trip to Ireland if their partner if their distributor, reached certain sales levels. And they had kind of a semi-regular in-market sales support where the MD travelled to the export market to support the partner. So they were constantly in touch, constantly thinking about how to keep them motivated and having these little incentives. Resolve any conflicts that may arise. So expect there will be difficulties in selling initially, and make sure you've got frank conversations, at your regular meetings about what else can be done, what else you think they should be doing. Be open to their feedback from the market, discuss what support they need, etc. And like I said, be super clear around those financial expectations. And a key point here too is expect a level of work at your end to keep this working. So relationship management isn't something that's going to happen by accident. It needs to be proactive. So you're going to need to think about who in your team is responsible for it, and how much time can they give to making sure that this works. Because it isn't just hand it over to the distributor and let them run with it. There does need to be that level of work from your team as well. So just finally then, in summary, deciding on your route to market first starts with market research. So think about those key questions. How do customers here typically buy? What do they trust? And what support do they need? You may choose to sell direct via a sales team, or online, or indirect via platforms, marketplaces, retail wholesale, distributors, partners, resellers, or sales agents. But each route to market will involve different trade-offs in things like speed, control, margin, and complexity. So think about what's best for your business in terms of your capabilities and your ambitions. Once you decide on your optimal route to market, set your partner or your distributor or your employed salesperson up for success through great sales enablement, and commit to managing the relationship with any indirect routes to market on an ongoing basis. Set up your agreements well at the start, and meet regularly to keep everything on track, and correct early as required. Okay, so that's us, and over now to the Q&A.
That's super. Thank you, Ruth, for that really excellent presentation there. Lots of super useful information to think about for companies on choosing, which approach might be right for them. So we've had a few questions coming in on the chat, which is great. Encourage you to continue publishing them in there. The first one is around kind of any advice that you might have on that first export sales. So, should a company always look to go direct to get that foothold, or are there scenarios where actually going indirect, first up, where that would be a better approach?
Mm-hmm. So I suppose when it comes to the very first sale, if it's possible, it's possibly better to keep that as a direct sale, because you're gonna find out, you learn so much in your first sale. So if you look at your early sales in the home market, think about all that you learnt about your customers, about how to sell, about what product works, what your customers need, etc. it'll be something similar if you do the first export sale yourself. There will be instances though where that is not possible. So maybe if if the industry is highly regulated, you might have to have a partner there. If there's a language barrier, you might say, there's a big opportunity for your product in Germany, but you don't speak German. It's going to be quite difficult for you unless you're going to employ somebody to help you with the translation, etc. So there may be reasons why it's not possible, but in my experience with Irish SMEs, doing that first sale directly is often the best way to go, or at least having those direct meetings and then maybe using a distributor to actually get the product to the customer. But doing some of that outreach directly is usually the best way to learn first.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can take that into, future relationships with those different partners that you may then look to partner up with in follow-up sales and everything.
Yeah.
That's great. So there's a question here on I guess hiring salespeople in international markets. So when do you have any advice on when might be the best time for a company to make that first hire in a new market?
I suppose what we'd often find with clients is that if they jump to do that too early, that person is very rarely successful. Because they don't tend to know as much about the company, and there tends to be a bit of a disconnect with that kind of international salesperson. So quite often, if the founder of the company, if the owner of the company actually does those kind of early sales, they will learn a lot. They can then help train somebody at a later stage. So I wouldn't be in a massive hurry to put an international salesperson in market. It'd be a lot easier to sort your domestic sales potentially through an employed salesperson, and have the owner or the founder actually start the international sales process. Or again, if you're doing the indirect route, if you've got you may decide that actually a distributor or sales agent or somebody might be a less risky way to begin to sell in that market. I think if you're going to go to the expense and hassle of having an employed person in that market, you need to be really clear on who the customer is, how they're selling your product, what targets you expect. So if you don't know any of that stuff, it's probably too early to have an employed salesperson in that target export market.
Yeah, and I think that point about being really clear on exactly who your target customer is absolutely vital if you're doing that, so you can hand that over to a person directly
100%.
into the market.
Yeah.
You mentioned there a question. Sorry, a question is coming on sale. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Companies come through on sales agents. So what's the typical kind of costs and commission associated with those sorts of relationships? I think you mentioned 1 to 30% is quite a broad range.
So basically, unless I knew the industry that you're talking about, I can't and even at that, it will vary. So for example, say you have a piece of equipment that costs 200,000, and say it's in pounds because you're selling it in the UK. Say it costs £200,000, your commission or the commission that I see as usually might be like 2%. Whereas if you're selling something that's, say, I don't know, £1,000, they might look for 15% of that. So it's, and again, higher depending on lower cost or, more difficult sale. So it's too difficult to say until you know the specifics. But there's wild variation and wild variation in what sales agents will charge, and even within the sales agent. So even selling the same product in the same market, sales agents will have different expectations. So if they know they can get you sales because they've got an amazing network, they may charge a higher commission, but you're more guaranteed the success. So there's so much variation there.
Yeah, excellent. I see we've got a minute left on the clock. I'm going to try and get a couple of quick ones in here. There's a question on what type of product was your friend selling on TikTok Shop? Did they choose UK or the US as their initial export market?
So makeup product, and they chose the UK first. Yeah.
Excellent. Good stuff. And then this one might be a challenge to answer in 30 seconds or so, but what are the kind of early warning signs that a distributor isn't necessarily the right fit for your company, and how soon should a company consider replacing them?
Okay, so first I would say, so I talked about kind of that they have the same direction of travel. So they need to kind of have a similar idea as you do as to how your product should be sold. If there's loads of conflict, so you need to take their advice because they may know the market better than you. But if they've got a totally different idea from you in terms of how that should be sold or where that should be sold, I would take that as an early warning sign. An obvious other warning sign is if there's no sales coming through or there doesn't seem to be any interest really from them in your product. You know, they're not asking you about anything or they're not in touch with you about the product. That can be a bit of a warning sign that you're way down their priority list. If you if they seem quite negative about your product, you know, if they have a lot of criticisms of it, i.e. they're struggling to sell it, again, that is a warning sign. Or if you hear anything negative around that distributor, around the reputation of that distributor, or you hear kind of rumors around financial troubles, etc., all of those things can be warning signs. So it's important to kind of have those regular meetings in, you know, have those frank conversations, make sure you have it set up right from the start. But you don't want your product to be sitting with distributor if it's not working. You want to, you know, you want to give it a chance if it's just around them needing more support. So you're trying to figure out quite quickly, is it that they need more support? Is it that you need to do some more work to help them? Or is it that it's the wrong distributor or sales partner for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that touches to the points that you had at the end of the presentation there, Ruth, on, you know, the importance of managing that relationship. So yeah, that's fantastic.
And just a final kind of point actually just make too is people's route to market change as they progress. So you will find that, you know, people start off at direct sales route, then they maybe will go later to a distributor, or maybe they actually begin with a distributor and decide to take it over themselves at a later point. So you're not having to decide what your route to market will be forever and a day. It's what makes sense for now, and what your plans are over the next while. But do expect that there will be, you know, changes. Very few people get it 100% right, and it's what they stick with forever and a day at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Ruth. And I think that brings us up to time quite nicely. So there's a few other questions in there. One was on choosing new export markets. We have a webinar recording on that you can find on our Get Exporting website. So please do take a look at that. But yeah, I think all that's left for me to thank you very much, Ruth, for today, for joining us and delivering such an excellent presentation, and to thank everybody as well who's dialed in and joined us today to take time out of your busy schedules to join. So we will be following up with an email following today's webinar. You'll get a copy of the recording and also a copy of Ruth's slides as well. So you'll be able to take a look back over that in your spare time. So thanks again, Ruth. Thanks everybody for joining, and I hope everyone has a good afternoon and see you soon.
Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye.